The city stretched endlessly beneath Michael Henderson's glass fortress. A world of motion and noise reduced to distant specks from his office high above the skyline. Inside, the air was conditioned to perfection, the silence precise and absolute, the kind that only money and authority could command. Mahogany gleamed under the soft light, abstract art hung like quiet trophies of taste, and the man at the center of it all sat immaculately dressed in a light blue suit, the picture of calm dominance. Michael thrived in this kind of space. Numbers bent to his will, markets moved with his decisions, and competitors trembled under the weight of his strategies. Control was his empire, and he ruled it without cracks, without pause. He leaned back slightly, blue eyes sharp as the report scrolled across the holographic display. His face betrayed nothing but focus. To the outside world, Michael Henderson was the kind of man who had mastered certainty. He had risen from the dust of obscurity to build a kingdom of glass and steel, and he carried the kingdom inside him, an armor of composure no one dared pierce. To his staff, he was decisive, calculated, untouchable. To his investors, he was the architect of victory. To his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, he was a father who loved fiercely but hid it beneath layers of polished restraint. Then the phone rang, its sharp tone sliced through the office like a blade. Louder than it should have been in the engineered quiet, Michael reached for it without hesitation, expecting his assistant's careful voice. Another scheduling matter, another negotiation. But what came through was not calm efficiency. It was fragile, trembling, small. "Daddy?" Emma's whisper carried a weight that pulled the air out of the room. He straightened instantly, something primal in him alerted, the controlled rhythm of his heartbeat faltering. "Emma?" he said, his voice softened in an instant, the still gone, replaced by a father's instinct. There was a pause, then the sound of tiny sobs. "I found Mom. She's in the hospital. She won't wake up." The words hung there, impossible. Jagged things that refused to fit into the life he had built. Michael blinked, certain he had misheard, certain that Emma's imagination had conjured a ghost. But her quivering voice pressed on, fragile and unshakable. "Daddy, it's really her. I saw her." The glass walls of his office seemed to lean inward, pressing him, suffocating him. His chair scraped back violently against the polished floor as he stood. The phone clenched so tightly in his hand it might have shattered. For a moment, his mind fought the words, rejecting them. Sarah had been gone for 6 years. Gone so completely that he had buried the truth under silence, had convinced himself and his daughter that there was no hope. He had shielded Emma with half-truths, painted her mother's absence as fate, as something that could not be undone. And now, in the voice of his little girl, those lies cracked apart. "Emma," he forced out, his tone breaking despite himself. "Where are you? Who told you this?" Her answers came in scattered fragments, the kind of breathless details only a child could give. The name of the hospital, the woman on the bed, the machines, the unmistakable recognition. Each piece tightened around him like a vice until the denial could no longer hold. She was not playing, not imagining. She had seen something real. Michael's pulse roared in his ears as he slammed the phone down and rushed toward the elevator. His reflection met him in the mirrored walls, not the untouchable titan of industry, but a man stripped bare, eyes wide with fear, hands trembling, every ounce of his crafted strength abandoned. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, held hostage by the frightened voice of his little girl and the impossible phrase she had spoken. The elevator doors opened with a hiss, and Michael strode through the lobby, ignoring the startled greetings of staff. He moved like a man possessed, the glass tower behind him no longer a symbol of victory, but a fragile monument already crumbling under the weight of a truth he could not escape. Outside, the city blurred as he climbed into the waiting car, his chest tight, his thoughts in chaos. "Hospital," he barked, his voice raw-dot as the driver obeyed, Michael's gaze fixed on the horizon. But his mind saw only one image, Sarah, alive yet unreachable, and Emma's small hand clutching hers. Control was gone. Certainty was gone. The empire he had built could not protect him now. For the first time in his life, Michael Henderson was running, not toward power, but toward the ghost of a past that refused to stay buried. Asterisk, the hospital loomed ahead like a monolith of steel and glass. But unlike his own skyscraper, this building carried no sense of power or triumph. It reeked of fragility, of bodies fighting battles they were losing. Michael's car screeched to a halt, and before the driver could open the door, he was already out. his polished shoes striking the pavement in frantic rhythm. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, but inside, as he pushed through the wide glass doors, the world shifted. The sterile tang of antiseptic clung to the air, mixed with the faint, lingering odor of old paint. Every step echoed like an accusation, reminding him of what he had buried, of the lies he had told his daughter to protect her or perhaps to protect himself. The receptionist froze when she saw him. Normally, Michael Henderson's presence was enough to command attention without words. But now, he looked nothing like the man they might have glimpsed on television or in glossy business magazines. His light blue suit, once a uniform of composure, was wrinkled from his hurried movements. His tie loosened as though it strangled him. His eyes, sharp and cold in the boardroom, now darted wildly, desperate and afraid. He didn't ask politely. He demanded the room number. His voice low, but edged with something so raw that the nurse didn't dare hesitate. The elevator doors slid shut, trapping him inside a box of mirrors. His reflection mocked him again, showing not the invincible CEO, but a man on the brink of collapse. He pressed his palm against the cold steel wall, trying to steady himself, but his mind was already racing. Sarah, her name throbbed in his chest like a wound reopened. For 6 years, he had forced himself to believe she was gone. Not missing, not hidden, gone. He had buried her in silence, in order, in empire. But Emma's voice had cracked open that grave. And now he was walking toward a truth that terrified him. The hallway seemed endless, each step heavier than the last. Nurses brushed past him, pushing gurneys, whispering in clipped tones, but he didn't hear them. The sound of machines reached him first, the steady beeping. That measured a life still clinging to the world. His feet stopped at the doorway, his throat tightening as if the air itself had turned to stone. There she was, Sarah. Her golden hair was splayed across the white pillow like strands of faded sunlight. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, lips colorless against the stark sheets. Tubes and wires wrapped around her like chains, connecting her to the orchestra of machines that kept her alive. Michael's chest seized. For a second, he almost turned away, convinced his mind had conjured her ghost. But then his gaze shifted. Emma stood beside the bed in her yellow dress, her tiny hand gripping Sarah's limp fingers with fierce determination. Her face was streaked with tears, her blue eyes red, but shining with something pure and unshakable. She looked up when she saw him, her small voice trembling, but filled with conviction. "Daddy, it's her. I found her. This is Mommy." The word struck harder than any boardroom defeat, harder than any financial ruin. Emma's innocence carved through the last of his denial, leaving him defenseless. In her eyes, there was no hesitation, no doubt. She had recognized her mother the moment she saw her, and in that certainty Michael felt the full weight of his years of silence. And half-truths crashing down, his feet moved forward without command. Each click of his polished shoes on the linoleum echoed like judgment. He reached the bedside, his hands trembling, his breath uneven. He wanted to speak, to call her name, but his throat betrayed him. His voice choked with fear and longing. He leaned closer, studying her face, the face he had kissed, the face he had convinced himself he would never see again. For one fragile moment, hope flared in him like fire. Could this truly be real? Could Sarah be here, alive, even in this broken state? But with the hope came dread. Where had she been all these years? Who had kept her from them? Why had she returned only now, like this caught between life and death? Behind him, Emma's voice quivered, but it carried a strength that silenced the storm inside him. "She just needs us, Daddy. If we stay, she'll come back. I know it." Asterisk. Michael closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerless, not because of markets or rivals or enemies, but because a 6-year-old girl had shattered the armor he had spent a lifetime forging. His kingdom of control had collapsed, and all that remained was a father, a husband, and the unbearable truth lying on a hospital bed before him. Asterisk. Michael barely slept that night. He sat in the stiff hospital chair beside Sarah's bed, his tie discarded, his suit jacket draped carelessly across the floor. The room was dim, lit only by the green glow of monitors that pulsed and beeped with mechanical certainty. Every sound pierced him: the hiss of oxygen, the soft hum of the foot pump, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. To him, it was both comfort and torture. It meant she was alive, yes, but it also meant she was trapped somewhere he could not reach. His empire, his resources, his power, none of it mattered here. Machines kept her alive, not him. and that truth cut him deeper than any corporate betrayal ever had. He looked at Emma, curled up in the small chair on the opposite side of the bed, her yellow dress wrinkled from the long hours, her tiny fingers still wrapped around her mother's hand even in sleep. Her breathing was uneven, small hiccuping gasps from crying herself out. She hadn't let go of Sarah once since she had found her. Michael's chest tightened as he watched her. His daughter was 6 years old, and yet tonight she looked older than he had ever allowed her to be. She was carrying a burden no child should, forced to believe in a mother her father had buried in silence. Memories clawed their way into his thoughts. The night Sarah had disappeared, the unanswered questions, the police reports that led nowhere, the cold dismissal of investigators when months turned into years. He had told himself he had done everything possible. But had he? Or had he given up too quickly, too willingly? Because facing the unknown was harder than accepting the lie of her death? He remembered Emma's questions in those early years, her small voice asking where Mommy had gone. He remembered his answers half-truths, evasions, bedtime stories crafted not to comfort her, but to shield himself. Now the truth lay in front of him, pale and motionless, and he realized the walls he had built around himself were nothing but cowardice wrapped in steel. The door opened quietly, and a nurse stepped in to check Sarah's vitals. Michael stood, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the bed. Who brought her here? His voice was low, firm, but cracked at the edges with desperation. The nurse hesitated. She was admitted 2 days ago. Unconscious, no identification. The staff assumed she was Jane Doe until your daughter recognized her. No ID. Michael's jaw tightened. No record of who brought her in. Just an anonymous call to emergency services, the nurse said softly. She was left outside the hospital entrance. By the time we brought her inside, whoever left her was gone. The words sank like lead in Michael's stomach. Someone had placed Sarah here, someone who had hidden her for 6 years. He glanced back at the fragile figure on the bed. Her body bore no obvious injuries, but her wrists showed faint marks as though bound. His fist clenched involuntarily. He turned away before Emma could see the fury in his eyes. The world he had built was one of order, of contracts and competition. But this was chaos. This was someone playing with the life of the woman he loved, and the innocence of the daughter who had saved him without knowing it. He had enemies, countless enemies, but which of them would strike at him through her? And why now? Emma stirred and rubbed her eyes, sitting up slowly. Daddy? Her voice was groggy, but the moment her gaze found Sarah, it lit with a fragile hope. She's still here, right? She won't leave again? Michael crouched beside her, his large hand covering her small one. For once, he didn't have an answer. The man who always had solutions, who always commanded certainty, could only whisper, I won't let her go again. Inside, though, a darker promise burned. Whoever had taken Sarah from them, whoever had hidden her away and returned her broken to this hospital bed, they would face him. And for the first time in his life, Michael Henderson wasn't thinking about profit margins or power struggles. He was thinking about vengeance. The heart monitor beeped steadily, but to Michael, it sounded like a countdown. He leaned closer to Sarah, studying her face, whispering words he hadn't dared to say in years. Come back to me, please. And then, faintly, impossibly, her eyelids trembled. Michael froze. His breath caught in his throat. Emma gasped, climbing onto the bed to clutch her mother's hand tighter. Mommy, she whispered, but the tremor faded, her body sinking back into stillness, leaving only silence and the machines to fill the room. Michael's heart thundered in his chest. That tiny movement could have been nothing, or it could mean everything. And for the first time in 6 years, hope became more dangerous than fear. The hospital never slept. Its halls hummed with the constant shuffle of nurses, the squeak of rubber soles against linoleum, and the low murmur of voices carrying news too heavy for walls to contain. Michael Henderson sat in that chaos as if encased in glass, every nerve wired to the steady beep of the monitor that tethered Sarah to life. It was morning now, sunlight bleeding through the blinds, but his eyes burned from a night without sleep. He hadn't moved far from the chair beside her bed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face the way it used to be, vibrant, laughing, alive. And every time he opened them, he was met with the cruel contrast of wires and silence. Emma stirred awake in the corner, her little body curled like a question mark in the stiff chair. She blinked at her father, then at her mother, as if to reassure herself that it hadn't been a dream. She's still here, she whispered, her small voice threading through the air like prayer. Michael's chest tightened. She's here. he answered softly, though the words felt more like a plea than a promise. The door opened, and a doctor stepped in, white coat fluttering as he carried a clipboard. He was middle-aged, with lines carved deep into his face, the kind that came from decades of telling families truths they didn't want to hear. "Mr. Henderson," he began, his voice calm but cautious. "Your wife's condition is stable, but unusual." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Unusual how?" The doctor hesitated, glancing at Emma as though the words weren't meant for a child's ears. Michael noticed and stood, his presence suddenly towering. "Say it." "She shows no brain damage," the doctor explained carefully. "No trauma, no stroke. It's as if she's simply sleeping. But this isn't a typical coma. It almost looks induced, chemically. Yet the tests don't match any known sedative." Michael's blood ran cold. Induced. Someone had done this to her. Someone had kept her alive, suspended, for years. His mind raced, each thought a blade cutting through the fragile barrier he'd built overnight. Who would do this? He demanded, more to himself than the doctor. The doctor shook his head. "We don't know, but the fact she was dropped here anonymously." He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the sterile air. Whoever brought Sarah back hadn't done it out of kindness. Michael's jaw clenched. His empire had always been a fortress, defended with contracts, lawyers, and iron discipline. But this was no boardroom attack. This was war waged in shadows, and the battlefield was his family. Emma slid off her chair and padded to his side, her small hand tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her eyes wide and old for her years, "don't let them take her again." The words pierced him deeper than the doctor's report. He knelt, gripping her shoulders gently. "I won't," he promised. His voice cracked, and for once he didn't try to hide it. "No one will touch her again." But even as he said it, he knew the storm was only beginning. By afternoon, Michael was back in motion. Not in his office, not in his tower, but in a place far more dangerous, his own mind, calculating, piecing together enemies and motives. His private investigator, an old friend from the early days of his rise, answered on the first ring. "Find out everything," Michael ordered, his voice low and sharp. "Who brought Sarah here? Who kept her hidden? Who benefits from her silence? I want names, I want answers, and I want them now." The investigator hesitated. "You think this was deliberate?" Michael's silence was answer enough. When he hung up, he stared at the floor, the weight of realization settling in. Someone had kept Sarah alive, hidden, only to release her back into his life now. Why? To break him, to expose something, to destroy what he had built. His enemies were many, competitors, former allies, people he had crushed on his way to the top. Any one of them could have orchestrated this. He looked at Sarah again, pale against the sheets, and for the first time in his career, Michael Henderson admitted that money and power would not be enough. Whoever had done this had played a longer game, a darker one, and they had chosen his family as the board. That night, as Emma slept with her head against his arm and the machines hummed their artificial lullaby, Michael whispered to the woman who could not hear him, "I don't know who did this to you, Sarah, but I will find them. And when I do, there won't be a corner of this earth where they can hide." Her eyelids fluttered faintly again, the smallest flicker of life. Michael leaned forward, heart pounding. Was it coincidence? Or was she trying to answer him, to warn him? He stayed like that for hours, waiting for another sign, the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing down. For the first time in his life, he wasn't Michael Henderson, the untouchable CEO. He was a man stripped bare, standing on the edge of a truth darker and more dangerous than any market war. And he knew whatever lay ahead, his empire might crumble. But he would not stop until the shadows that stole his wife were dragged into the light. The storm didn't begin in the hospital. It began in Michael Henderson's own empire. By the third day of his absence, the whispers had reached the boardroom. A man like Michael was never unseen, never unreachable. He lived in the rhythm of meetings, negotiations, stock movements. His very presence was the pulse of the company. But now the pulse had gone silent. Executives gathered in the glass-walled boardroom, speaking in clipped tones, glancing nervously at empty chairs. Investors called, their voices edged with impatience. The media speculated on mergers, scandals, collapse. The fortress Michael had built, the one he thought unshakable, trembled the moment he stepped away. But Michael didn't care. Not anymore. He sat at Sarah's bedside as Emma colored on the hospital table. the child humming softly under her breath. Each time the monitor beeped, he listened as though the sound carried meaning. Every flicker of Sarah's eyelids, every twitch of her fingers, he memorized with ruthless precision. Yet while his eyes stayed on her, his mind spun elsewhere, calculating, tracing lines of possibility. Whoever had kept Sarah alive hadn't done it without purpose, and whoever had released her now was sending a message to him. On the fourth night, his investigator returned with scraps of information. She wasn't just dropped off, the man said, sliding a folder on Michael's lap. She was watched. The call to emergency services was traced to a payphone, and security cameras caught a figure leaving the hospital minutes before your daughter found her. Hooded, careful, but deliberate. This wasn't a random act of mercy, it was staged. Michael's jaw tightened. Staged for me to see, yes, the investigator said. And there's more. She's been moved before. Private clinics, out-of-state facilities under false names. Always unconscious. Always hidden. Whoever did this had resources and patience. Michael flipped through the photos. Each one another knife to the gut. Sarah in grainy images, wheeled into ambulances, carried through side doors. Always faceless men moving her like cargo. Rage swelled in him. Someone had stolen 6 years from them. 6 years of Emma's childhood. 6 years of his own grief. 6 years of Sarah's life reduced to shadows. And yet, in the midst of his fury, a darker question gnawed at him. Why return her now? Why let her surface only when Emma was old enough to understand? The timing was no accident. This was no kindness, it was strategy. By the fifth day, the cracks in his empire deepened. One of his rivals leaked stories to the press about his absence, hinting at instability, suggesting his company was ripe for takeover. The board demanded answers, but Michael ignored their calls. He sat in the dim hospital room, phone buzzing relentlessly in his pocket, until finally he silenced it for good. For once, he let the empire tremble. Emma noticed. One evening, as he adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, she looked up with wide, solemn eyes. "You're not going to work, Daddy." "No," he admitted softly. "Not now. But your people need you." Her voice was innocent, but her words echoed the world outside the one he had left behind. Michael knelt, his face level with hers. "Right now, the only people who need me are you and your mother." His voice cracked on the last word, and Emma's little hands cupped his cheeks, grounding him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to weep, not as a CEO, but as a husband and a father. That night, the hospital room became a sanctuary and a war room all at once. He drafted messages not to his board, but to allies he could trust outside corporate walls. Quietly, he began building his own investigation team, not bound by stock prices or shareholders, but by loyalty. If someone had played this game with Sarah's life, then Michael would not fight them in courtrooms or conference calls. He would drag them into the light, one by one. The following morning, as sunlight spilled across Sarah's face, her lips parted faintly and a whisper of sound escaped. It wasn't words, not fully, but it was enough to freeze both Michael and Emma in place. Emma bolted upright, clutching her mother's hand. She spoke. "Daddy." "I heard it." Michael leaned close, heart hammering. Her mouth moved again, a sound like the ghost of a name. His name, and in that moment, Michael knew the things. Sarah was trying to return, and whoever had kept her hidden all these years would not let her go without a fight. The empire outside was collapsing, but inside this hospital room, a greater battle was beginning, one for truth, for love, for vengeance. And Michael Henderson, the man who once rode glass towers, was ready to burn them all to the ground if it meant saving her. Asterisk, the hospital had become Michael's universe. White walls, humming machines, the faint antiseptic sting in the air. Days blurred into nights, and time seemed to slow round the fragile figure lying motionless in the bed. Yet in those quiet hours, change was stirring, not just in Sarah's body, but in the people who kept vigil by her side. Emma was no longer simply a frightened child clutching her mother's hand. She was becoming something more, an anchor, a voice of certainty in a storm that threatened to tear Michael apart. It happened on a gray afternoon, the sky outside swollen with rain. Emma sat by Sarah's bed, her legs swinging, her voice soft as she hummed a lullaby. Michael was half listening, his thoughts tangled in phone calls from his investigator leads that stretched into shadows, whispers of hidden clinics and false names. But then Emma said something that snapped him from his haze. "Mommy used to sing this when I was little. She said it was only for me." Michael turned sharply. "Emma, what did you say?" Emma looked at him with wide, earnest eyes. The song. The one she used to sing. I remembered it when I saw her again. She sang the tune again. Quietly, but this time she added words Michael had never taught her. Words he hadn't heard in years. His blood ran cold. That lullaby wasn't in any recording, wasn't in any bedtime story. It was something Sarah herself had whispered to Emma when she was a baby. Something Michael had thought lost with her. Where did you hear that? His voice was low, trembling with a mix of fear and awe. Emma tilted her head. Mommy told me, a long time ago, and sometimes I dream it. Like she's still singing to me. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. His daughter's memory was not just nostalgia, it was connection. Somehow, Sarah had been with her all along, in fragments, in whispers, in ways he could not understand. And now, Emma was revealing pieces of a puzzle Michael hadn't even known existed. That night, Emma told him more. She spoke of phrases Sarah had whispered when she thought no one was listening, of secret promises about keeping her safe and not letting them find us. Michael listened in silence, every word cutting deeper. Who was them? Who had Sarah been hiding from even before she disappeared? By the seventh day, his world outside had begun to fracture. Stock prices dipped. A hostile rumor spread through the media, suggesting Michael was unfit to lead. The board sent formal letters demanding his return. Rivals circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. His phone buzzed relentlessly, but he ignored it. The empire could collapse. It didn't matter, because that morning, Sarah's fingers moved again, not a twitch, not a dream. A deliberate movement, curling weakly round Emma's hand. Emma gasped so loudly it startled the nurses. Daddy, she squeezed me. Michael rushed to the bedside, heart pounding. He leaned over, whispering urgently, Sarah, it's me. It's Michael. If you can hear me, hold on, please. Her eyelids fluttered. A sound escaped her lips, hoarse, broken, but unmistakable. It was a single word. Run. The room froze. Emma clung to her hand, terrified. Michael felt ice spread through his veins. That one word shattered any illusion of safety. Sarah wasn't simply trapped in a coma, she was warning them. The door burst open seconds later. A man in a suit entered, flanked by two others. Their eyes flicked to Michael with predatory precision. One held a briefcase, another a folded document. Mr. Henderson, the first said smoothly, as if this were an ordinary meeting. We represent interests who believe it would be best for you to step aside. Effective immediately, Michael stared at them, the monitors beeping a violent rhythm in his ears. He realized then that this wasn't just about his empire, or even about Sarah. It was about control. Someone had orchestrated this, her disappearance, her return, even this moment to break him. And Sarah's warning echoed in his mind. Run. But Michael Henderson didn't run. He stood, his tall frame casting a shadow across the men in suits. His empire might be crumbling, his wife barely alive, but for the first time in years, he felt something stronger than fear, resolve. You came from my company, he said quietly, dangerously. But you made one mistake. You touched my family. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Behind him, Emma's small voice trembled. Daddy? He glanced back at her, at Sarah, and knew the truth. This was no longer about boardrooms or business. This was war, and he was ready to fight it. The rain outside hammered against the hospital windows, streaking the glass with silver as if the sky itself were warning of what was coming. Michael stood rigid at the foot of Sarah's bed, his body a wall between the two men in suits and the family they had tried to shatter. The steady beep of the monitors filled the silence after his words, each pulse a reminder that Sarah was still here, still alive, still fighting to return. Emma clung to her mother's hand, her wide eyes darting between her father and the strangers who dared intrude. Step aside, Mr. Henderson, the taller man said, his voice measured, almost polite, but carrying a venom that made Michael's stomach twist. He set the briefcase on the counter with a metallic click. You don't want this to get ugly. Michael's jaw tightened. For years, he had fought battles with contracts, lawyers, and billion-dollar deals. But this was primal. These men weren't here for negotiation. They were here to end what Sarah's survival threatened to expose. He looked at Emma, saw her trembling against the bed, and felt the last of his restraint shatter. You have no idea how ugly it's about to get. He growled. Before the men could respond, the monitor spiked. Sarah's body jolted, her eyelids flickering violently. Emma gasped, climbing onto the bed. Daddy, Mommy's waking up. The men stiffened, their polished calm cracking for the first time. One reached subtly inside his jacket, but Michael moved before thought could stop him. He lunged forward, his hand gripping the man's wrist with brutal force, slamming it against the wall. The briefcase clattered to the floor, bursting open documents spilling like spilled blood. Michael glimpsed photographs, receipts, signatures, evidence of something vast and meticulously orchestrated. The second man cursed, stepping toward him, but at that exact moment Sarah's voice tore through the room, weak, hoarse, but unmistakably alive. "Michael." Time froze. Michael's grip loosened in shock, his head snapping toward the bed. Sarah's eyes were open, hazy, glassy, but burning with a desperate urgency. Emma sobbed with joy, pressing her face against her mother's arm. "Mommy, you came back." The men in suits faltered, retreating a step. Michael's chest ached as he rushed to her side, kneeling, taking her trembling hand. Tears burned in his eyes as her fingers curled weakly round his. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought I lost you," but Sarah's eyes, fragile though they were, blazed with fear. She shook her head faintly. "They'll come again. Don't trust them. Don't trust." Her voice broke off in a cough, but she forced the word out. "You're bored." The revelation hit like thunder. His bored, the very men who had built his empire alongside him were the ones who had orchestrated her disappearance. They had kept her alive, hidden as leverage. And now, with his company in turmoil, they were using her return as the final weapon to break him. Michael staggered back, the truth unraveling in his mind. All the years of silence, all the unanswered questions, it had never been fate or failure. It had been betrayal, carried out by the people he had trusted most. The men moved again, but this time Michael was ready. His voice, sharp as steel, cut through the room. "Get out. Now, if you so much as breathe near my family again, I'll bury every last one of you and burn what's left." They hesitated, but the fire in his eyes drove them back. Muttering threats under their breath, they slipped out the door, leaving the scattered evidence at his feet. Michael turned back to Sarah, his hands shaking as he brushed damp strands of hair from her face. She looked at him with a mixture of relief and terror. "They'll come for you next," she whispered. "They never wanted you to know. But Emma saved me." Her gaze shifted to the little girl, and for the first time in years, mother and daughter shared a moment unbroken by lies or distance. Michael felt something inside him harden. He was no longer just a CEO, no longer just a man defined by control. He was a father, a husband, and now a soldier in a war he hadn't chosen, but would fight to the end. His empire might crumble, his reputation might burn, but none of it mattered. The truth was in his hands now, and so was his family. He gathered Emma in his arms, kissed Sarah's trembling hand, and whispered, "They tried to break us, but they made one mistake. They underestimated what happens when you take everything from a man and leave him nothing but the will to fight." Outside, the storm raged on, lightning splitting the sky. Inside, a family long thought broken was piecing itself back together, fragile, wounded, but unyielding. And Michael Henderson, once the untouchable king of glass towers, stood at the edge of a new war, ready to bring down every wall of betrayal that had stolen 6 years of his life. Because now he knew the truth, and the truth was more dangerous than any empire he had ever built.